Given the current tariff war activity between the US and Canada, today is April 1st. Tomorrow, the US is going to initiate the tariff that they've been threatening for the last few months officially. You being in this field, being an architect that works on both Detroit projects and over here in Windsor, how do you see that affecting the architecture and construction industry, specifically with regard to what you do, in between these two different countries and cities?
Any tariff or trade war, whatever you want to call it, I think is going to hurt both sides, especially being border towns. I think we're actually in the nucleus of just in the worst probably spot in both nations for this type of thing to happen. We all know that our systems are kind of intertwined when it comes to like automotive and such, but in architecture, building, construction, it's very similarly intertwined. A lot of lumber comes from Canada, which could affect home building in the States. Already the steel tariff is affecting, steel studs or any steel that goes into a building. Now, the feeling that we get from builders and such is it hasn't really hit anything yet, but even just the threat of it has slowed down developers from investing in projects. It's really put a scare through the whole building and development community, and created just a lot of like uncertainty at the time, and maybe a little bit less on the American side. But I think once, and hopefully it's not enacted, but if it is, I feel like the pain will start being felt on that side, and I think there'll be reaction to that. But I haven't at this moment seen it a ton personally. But yeah, over here, it's a little uneasy. Now, that being said, I think we've been through one or two of these so far already.
Yeah.
And I think people are just getting tired of it and saying, you know what, life can't just stop because of this. So just recently in the last month, I've seen kind of an uptick and really like a reaction to it. And the Canadian reaction, the silver lining for Canada, is that it's actually brought our communities together a lot more. And it's really created more of a, not only national pride, but a local pride. Hey, welcome to Felix Culpa Architecture. Come on inside.
What's up, Brad?
Hello.
We're here at Felix Culpa Architecture Studio in Windsor, Ontario. Right in the heart of the city. We are a boutique firm, design firm, that focuses in on residential, multi-use spaces, commercial spaces, and multi-unit residential. This is the office. The office is actually a old convenience store built back in I think it was the early 1900s. We have an apartment in the back, and this was my first project that was kind of owner developer, if you will. So we renovated the back. We have a great tenant back there, and then we created this little space to be ours, our office here. We did this basically on a dime. But we also wanted to have the vibe, have the feeling of when, almost like a coffee shop or a bar, someone comes in here and feels instantly comfortable to talk about their project and get to know us. So a lot of the stuff we did was, we use industry materials like OBS siding. We've just sanded it down lightly or painted it. We use just, plumbing, tubing for shelving and butcher block. Countertops we just stripped into shelves. Countertops we just used for the bar. The floor, we basically put a sand down on it. We were gonna remove all this mastic, but once we put a clear coat on top of it, we thought it was kind of a fit the whole vibe of the place. So, and then we just, we use this space not only for our work, but we entertain in it, and we try to have community events and such. So it's kind of like a hub, a little hub of the neighborhood that's really revitalized or started the revitalization of this kind of section of Windsor here. This section has a lot of history. Just down the street was the old GM plant. Just over here is actually just down the street over this way is Ford City. So this is where Henry Ford came over and bought the Walkerville Wagon Company and started Ford Canada. And then just up the road is Chrysler, or the Stellantis minivan plant. So this is like the automotive capital of Canada, and we're right in the hub of it. So this had all, like, this was like basically the main area of Windsor until it started like bleeding out into the outskirts. We have industry all over the place here, and now it's a little bit more lower income, and it just went through some hard times and is just really ready for, you know, that, you know, fresh breath. When we bought this, it's got to be 2 or 3 years now. Quite the journey. I was working in my mechanical room in my basement for the first couple of years of the firm. I just had to get out. And so I started looking. Renting was not, you know, it was an option, but just it didn't seem to be down my alley. So I started looking at places, and honestly, this was one of 2 places I originally looked at. And I think instantly we walked in the space and thought, wow, there's so much potential in this building. At first, it only had a clear story about the size of just above the door, and it was pretty rough. I think it was used as a party house and what have you. But yeah, like I said, we saw the potential. There's enough property in the back that we want to do a tiny home, so we want to increase the development on this property. There's a lot to the side that I would love to kind of purchase and really create more community in this area. And then we've been looking at even another property just down the street on Drouillard, which is in Ford City, and it would allow us to expand as an office. So the one thing that this office doesn't have is a lot of room, and eventually we're gonna have to, you know, upgrade to hopefully grow the team. So we're looking at actually a building that is kind of similar area, similar vibe, and really in a community that, you know, is just starving for some more life into it. And I think we could bring that. Yeah. So Felix Culpa, it comes from a Latin phrase. Basically, it means serendipity or happy accident. The history of the firm is I've worked in the industry for close to 20 years now as an intern architect and an architect. And COVID came along, and I was working in a firm just outside of Detroit, Newman Smith. And I unfortunately got laid off and started my own practice here in Windsor. Luckily, I had my degree, I had business started up that I was already doing like some moonlighting and such. But when I first got laid off, it was like the morning I got laid off, the afternoon I started my website and started rolling on this project. And I really found that it was a huge challenge, not only because when I was in Detroit, I was doing a lot of institutional work. I was working for a larger firm. So just coming out and doing everything yourself was quite the challenge. You have to wear all these hats. I didn't know anything about business, so I had to like learn like how to be a business person, how to take my architect hat off and put a business hat on. And I've been really, you know, learning that ever since, and drawing off mentors, local people to really help grow the company. When I was just getting out of high school, I got into tool and die. I worked in that industry for a couple of years, and not that I didn't like the industry, but it was like during the recession in the early 2000s and just hard times. I went back to school and fell into a industry that took my, you know, love for working with my hands and the technical aspect of it, and combined it with my love of art and creativity. And yeah, I jumped in, you know, almost head first, not feet first, into architecture. And I think having the background of tool and die has given me a perspective and a lens that maybe other professionals don't have. And that's like the blue collar mentality, you know, working, getting your hands dirty, and just the hardness of those trades, I think, is spilling into my professional career.
Is this you up here?
So that's my grandfather's hockey team.
Nice.
He's actually this one right here. So yeah.
Tell me about why that picture is important to you.
Well, being Canadian, hockey is is a staple, and you know, having the family up there is great to have. Yeah, it just brings you back to, you know, a different time, and it just puts some clarity on kind of maybe where things have come from and where they are now.
Absolutely, and I see a couple of. Are these awards?
Yeah, so these are all my certificates, either from school, but some of the other ones I'm required to have. As a architect in Ontario, you're supposed to hang your professional designation and your certificate of practice. So saying that we are a fully licensed architect and architectural firm.
Now, is that a Biggie bobblehead?
It is. My wife actually wanted me to have like one of these neon signs that said it was all a dream. So
I love it.
Yeah. So at first it was just myself doing everything, and then I got lucky enough to bring in an intern architect, Kylene here.
Hi guys.
Hey, wait a minute. Where's all the stuff on your desk? You need to.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Tell me about this little.
That I got for my birthday from Brad's wife Jill.
Nice.
And his kids, Violet and Eddy. Hello. I am Kylene, and I'm an intern architect. I started about a year ago, actually just over a year ago now, and with Brad here at Felix Culpa Architecture. My background is out of school. I started working in Victoria, BC for an architecture firm there, and then my hometown is here in Windsor, so I moved back home and I worked in construction for a little bit, and then yeah, I got hired on here.
What did you do in construction?
I might have to back it up a bit. So throughout my childhood, I've always been involved in construction. My dad is in the industry, and so I've worked for him for a number of years since I could swing a hammer. Most of what I worked on was residential homes, and so that's a lot of my background and part of the reason why I got into architecture. I have more of a hands-on approach, and I understand what I'm drawing through what I've experienced on site. So that's been very helpful in the field. I think that Brad and I have similar experiences, and with Brad in the tool and die industry and my in construction, they're both kind of like blue collar industries that eventually translated into architecture, and we got here different ways, but in similar senses. And that attracted me to the firm. I think that we mesh well together and work well together. So that's been awesome within the last year that I've been here. Sure, this is in addition to a residence in LaSalle, Ontario. What our clients would hope to achieve is using their existing home, but then adding a master bedroom, a family room, laundry room, and expanding the garage. And so it's almost about 40% of their home that's increasing on the main level. And so we're spilling out into the backyard and using some space there. I mean, this isn't the best project to showcase.
So your firm operates in both Canada and the US. So, you know, with a strong focus on Detroit, you have a decent amount of projects, or have done a number of projects in the city of Detroit in the past. So what are some of the differences in like how architecture and development are approached in these two different markets?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, although we're like, you know, considered, or once was considered, a little brother, you know, we differ in a couple different ways. You know, through development, we're usually a little bit more, I guess, maybe tight with our money, and we're looking for like proven results. Whereas I find like Detroit is a little bit more risk averse And I think there's like a lot more kind of incentives to go after in that area, which I think breeds a little bit more maybe innovation. Whereas here we're like, okay, what's the proven model and let's go after it. So there's pros and cons to both of those. I think culturally, I think as a country, we're maybe on the same page nationally as a whole. But I think Detroit really strives at, celebrating their culture and their history, which again has some really cool things that you can do with that pride. Regulations in Canada, again, are a little bit more strict. We have a little bit more maybe environmental laws and such, whereas, again, I think that in Michigan and Detroit, you can, work with the cities and townships a little bit more, and they really like to rejuvenate. So they put incentives on rejuvenating communities a little bit more than maybe Canada, or maybe it's a little bit easier. Yeah.
So working with your local government when it comes to like permitting and zoning, it's a little bit more, I guess, restricted here in Windsor,
yeah,
as opposed to over in Detroit, because usually it's the other way around. Usually whenever we're talking to other people in other cities, they always say that Detroit is a little more challenging in one format or another, or has been in the past, and they're getting better. But we generally hear that in the city of Detroit, it's a little harder to get things to the finish line from the local government side, whether it be zoning, tax abatements, things of that nature.
Sure. So it would be, you're probably right. It's probably similar to the way it is in Canada. I find that, Ontario and the communities around here, the public and private they have like a little bit of a divide, where I guess that's where I'm speaking to, whereas I feel like, and maybe not necessarily like right in the city of Detroit, but in Michigan as a whole, I feel like the public and private work a little bit better together. So it's some challenges in that. Again, they maybe keep some bad actors out, but also I think it kind of hampers the development a little bit. So absolutely. I'm actually part of an organization over here where we've created a building liaison group to tackle a lot of that red tape and to really start changing the mind frame from the public sector to start working more like a private developer and start thinking more like a private developer. Because I think at the end of the day, if government could think like developers, there's just more money to be had for both sides of the coin. So,
absolutely. A random question. If you could potentially redesign any iconic building in the city of Detroit, which one would it be and why?
So if I could design or redesign a building, it would probably be what's actually going on right now, and it'd be the Rensen.
Absolutely.
I think the Rensen was a alien development that didn't care about Detroit. And actually, like, I remember when the Rensen was actually first put down, and they had this giant like berm in the front of it, which you couldn't even see. You barely could see the building, you couldn't see the waterfront, and it just really disconnects the entire city with one of the biggest gems, which is the river. And so I'd love to see that redeveloped, and it kind of looks like it's walking down that path of redevelopment. So I'm excited to see kind of how it reshapes Detroit. I know a lot of people are worried about that redevelopment, but I honestly think it's for the better, and I think it will be forgotten that anything even happened to it once it's done, and it'll just be a kind of a shining jewel at the end of Woodward there.
Given the current tariff war activity between the US and Canada, today is April 1st, and from my understanding, tomorrow the US is going to initiate the tariff that they've been threatening for the last few months officially. You being in this field, being an architect that works on both Detroit projects and over here in Windsor, how do you see that affecting the architecture and construction industry, specifically with regard to what you do, you know, in between these two different countries and cities?
Sure, yeah. So I think, first of all, I think that any tariff or trade war, whatever you want to call it, I think is going to hurt both sides, especially being border towns. I think we're actually in the nucleus of just in the worst probably spot in both nations for this type of thing to happen. We all know that our systems are kind of intertwined when it comes to like automotive and such, but in architecture, building, construction, it's very similarly intertwined. You know, a lot of lumber comes from Canada, which could affect home building in the States. Already the steel tariff is affecting, you know, steel studs or any steel that goes into a building. Now, the feeling that we get from builders and such is it hasn't really hit anything yet, but even just the threat of it has slowed down developers from investing in projects. It's really put a scare through the whole building and development community, and created just a lot of like uncertainty at the time, and maybe a little bit less on the American side. But I think once, and hopefully it is not enacted, but if it is, I feel like the pain will start being felt on that side, and I think there'll be reaction to that. But I haven't at this moment seen it a ton personally. But yeah, over here, it's a little uneasy. Now, that being said, I think we've been through one or two of these so far already.
Yeah.
And I think people are just getting tired of it and saying, you know what, life can't just stop because of this. So just recently in the last month, I've seen kind of an uptick and really like a reaction to it. And the Canadian reaction, the silver lining for Canada, is that it's actually brought our communities together a lot more. And it's really created more of a, not only national pride, but a local pride. And there's no love lost between us and the Americans. We know it's not the majority of the people's position to do something like this. So we haven't really lost that love, but my biggest fear is that, you know, there's almost like a trust that's been broken to a sense. So hopefully we can get back to business and repair all of those kind of, you know, broken fences and get back to business. And I don't know if this is directly connected to this situation, but not only me, but I've had personal colleagues that have, you know, lost projects potentially due to something like this. And I don't know if it's a comfort thing or a political thing. I try not to get involved in that, but you know, it does affect all of us. And I think it will touch us all at some point if it happens. So my hope is that we can kind of keep playing nice in the sandbox and continue on here.
So you're active in several industry associations in Windsor. So how do you see basically the Detroit-Windsor region evolving architecturally in the coming years?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I'm a part of Windsor Construction Association. I'm on the board of that. I'm on the board of the Windsor Home Building Association, and I'm on the board of the Windsor Chamber of Commerce, which we have a relationship with the Detroit Chamber of Commerce. So I am also a member of that chamber. So having these like relationships and being on the boards of these things, I've been kind of a little bit more privy to, you know, what's being said and done to work together. And actually now, due to some of these trade war threats, we've actually been working even closer with our Detroit allies on a community basis. And I think that can definitely work in architecture by just like expanding like the region. So I think if we hold strong on a regional thing and not just Detroit, not just Windsor, I think we have always had an identity together. And I think, you know, architecturally, Windsor can learn a lot from Detroit, and Detroit can learn a lot from Windsor. So I think if we just keep that dialogue going and keep sharing our experiences, then I think it can just grow not only architecturally, but just culturally, yeah.
So a lot of the projects that you've talked to me about and showed me integrate indoor and outdoor spaces. And of course, some people believe in climate change and some people don't. Do you see a growing demand for this kind of design?
Climate change in Canada isn't as debatable of an issue. I think it's more of a certainty than not. And we've actually instituted a lot of our building codes around environmental sustainability. That being said, we have an obligation, and I think as an architect, sustainability isn't a new word. This is a word, this is like a design practice that has been around since kind of the beginning master builders. And saying that, you know, when I say that, it's contextual. So how does the light come in or the air flow through your house passively? Things like that have always been a part of how you should think about designing buildings anyway. With this new kind of life to a climate movement, I think there's a lot of validity to it in terms of even just saving clients money. So the more insulation, the more money you put up front maybe, and make your buildings more insulated or airtight, the more money you save on the back end through mechanical systems or what have you. So at the end of the day, whether you believe it or not, it makes a lot of sense because, again, if you don't make dollars, you don't make sense. So.
Yeah. What advice would you give young architects looking to start their own firm in 2025?
Cool, yeah. So advice I'd give to young architects that are looking to start their firm is ask questions, ask tons of questions, get involved. So get involved in groups, design groups, development groups, community groups, and just get a lay of the land. So networking is, first of all, humongous to any business, to get business, but to really understand who you want to work for and what kind of work you want to do. That's I think the biggest portion of it. And yeah, just be humble, ask questions, and get your face out there.
So Brad, where do you see Felix Culpa in the next 5 years?
We see Felix Culpa as like a premier destination as a boutique firm. I want to keep it small and nimble, but I want to be a force in the region, both Detroit and Windsor region, for developers that are doing smaller developers that are doing infill lots or unique projects, like commercial projects, and of course like residential or mixed use. So what we're trying to do is grow our group to be able to service as many of these developers or clients as possible. And eventually I want to expand our development footprint within at least the Windsor community and hopefully beyond, yeah.
Where can we find you?
Okay, yeah, you can find me at www.felixculpaarchitecture.com. You can find me on Instagram at Felix Culpa Architecture. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. Please message me, call me, email me, whatever you can.
Is that downtown? This little strip with all those stores and stuff?
That's Ford City.
When I drove down there, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize like that was actually a bustling commercial corridor. Dude,
yeah, you want to go down there? I'll show you the place that we were thinking about getting. Yeah, so this is Ford City down on Drouillard. I'm kind of in the heart of Windsor. The Ford factory you can kind of see off in the distance there. That's kind of the original Ford Canada factory, and they still pump out, I think, trucks and motors and this and that. And this was like the result of that. So this was the kind of the town around it. mixed from, religious to commercial. There's some residential mixed into it. This was an old car shop turned into a cookie bar. So there's kind of a mix of surviving businesses and new businesses as we walk the street. So Windsor and Canada as a whole is facing humongous housing shortage, and a lot of that is affordable housing as well. So we don't just need housing, we need affordable housing. So I think the big problem is Windsor is known for single family dwelling units, which just don't cut it when your population grows. So you need kind of the missing middle, you need apartment buildings, and even if they're low-rise apartment buildings, to fill in some of these properties and stuff. So yeah, it's a big problem and one that needs to be addressed on all sorts of levels, from government all the way down to the developer. This is actually the building that we were going to buy. Yeah. Okay. So this would have been our whole office, obviously an old house, but the other thing that this has for us potentially is I could even see knocking this down and then putting up multiple stories in the future. So this area has a lot of that, that you could see that you could save or kind of gentrify a little bit. We've had a lot of people experiment. So I don't know what this place is, but it used to be a bar called Pressure Drop. And they use the outside as kind of outdoor spaces. They'd have DJs here. Every year they close the whole street and they call it Dropped on Drouillard. And it's just kind of like a street party vibe. And although there's a lot of vacancy in the area, it's a special place on Drouillard here. It's got a lot of grit and a lot of personality, and a lot of people rooting for it. So it's definitely a place that we'd like to be a part of and help, take the next step. So yeah, historically, Windsor has just, been stifling with development. People tend to sit on land and property. Right now, our downtown core went from kind of Sin City. Yeah. Everyone's coming over here for clubs and stuff like that. And it's all kind of disappeared, and it's sitting in purgatory now. Nobody knows what to do with it, and there's not a lot of action where the spirit of Windsor, the regular residents, want it to be something. And it's actually it's funny because when Detroit started to really revitalize, that's when Windsor started to kind of fall off, and it's kind of crazy, this shift between the two instances. And I don't think one had anything to do with the other, but all of us Windsorites are we look across the border and we say look at what they're doing. Why can't we do that? Our city's half the size, they're not even. And we can't seem to get the wheels in motion. So there's a little bit of, maybe jealousy, but also possibility, because we see the possibility over there, and we see how people have changed it. And not just from Detroit got lucky enough with the Dan Gilberts and the Illiches. We don't necessarily have that, but I think what's not seen is people like yourself, the small people, not to call you small, but small scale people that have been, doing big things. So I think that's where we need to take a lesson from Detroit and say, stop worrying about the big fish and start worrying about what we can do and how we can change our community over here. So